Everyone, someone asked me the question, do I think Bitcoin will ever be the exclusive world currency? And if so, wouldn't the price per Bitcoin need to be a lot more than $1 million per coin? And how do you even measure that in a world where Bitcoin has taken over everything? So let me take those one by one. One, do I think Bitcoin will be the future exclusive world reserve currency? The answer is I don't know, but it does not have to be successful. So various people make predictions. Some people say, yes, it will be the exclusive currency of the world because it is so much better than every other currency that it will outcompete every other currency. And there's a very compelling case to be made that that is the case. There are other people who say, no, Bitcoin will be the primary reserve currency, meaning it'll be the primary currency that people store, that they store their wealth in, that they hold, and that they, use for large transactions, but that there will always be smaller currencies that are used for day-to-day transactions. Now, it begs the question, like, why would you use any other currency for day-to-day transactions if you don't have to? Now, in the case of often lots of countries, people save in US dollars because it doesn't lose its value as fast as their local currency, and then they buy their daily stuff that they need with pesos or whatever the local currency is in Nigeria or in Brazil or in Argentina or Venezuela, whatever. But then they don't actually save in that currency because the inflation is so high that you can't save in that currency. So I can see it both ways. My inclination would be to say Bitcoin does become the exclusive currency of the world. Again, for the reason being, there's no reason to have any other currency for payments, for day-to-day payments, because Bitcoin works just fine for that. It doesn't have the availability problems of the US dollar. The reason, for example, people don't just use the US dollar in every country is it's hard to get a US dollar bank account. It's hard to get US dollars to transact with. It's just the whole currency of the country is based on a different currency. And so it's hard to use another country's currency as your own currency if that's not an official thing, like it is in some countries that are like Panama, where the US dollar is the official currency. I tend to think it will become the official reserve currency of the world and the official payment currency of the world. But I think that will take decades, like actual decades, and probably a lot of decades before that happens worldwide. All right. So second, would the price need to be higher than $1 million? Absolutely. So the price of $1 million per Bitcoin, is the anticipation that it takes the place of gold. So gold, the total value of all the gold in the world is something like $17 trillion or $18 trillion. And the value of all the Bitcoin in the world is about 1/10 that, $1.8 trillion or so. So Bitcoin needs to increase in value to, from $97,000 per coin to, let's pick a round number, $970,000 per coin, something like 10x to get to the size of gold. Gold is obviously used in zero payment transactions. So it is only a store of value and nothing else. So Bitcoin can get to $1 million per coin just by being a store of value without being a medium of exchange, meaning nobody actually uses it to buy stuff. They just use it to store long-term value, like people use gold for that purpose. So Bitcoin can get to $1 million, which means if Bitcoin goes beyond the role of gold, which I think it will, I think Bitcoin is way more valuable than gold, and because it has vastly superior monetary characteristics. And so as a result, I think the price of Bitcoin will likely go way past $1 million per coin. But the problem is there's not a good way to estimate that. Michael Saylor, the CEO and founder of MicroStrategy, which is the largest Bitcoin holder in the entire world. They hold more Bitcoin than literally anyone else, including the US government. He estimates his sort of worst case scenario is that every Bitcoin is going to be worth $3 million per coin. And that his sort of base scenario, the medium scenario, is $13 million per coin. And his sort of highest case scenario is $49 million per coin. So worst case, $3 million per coin, middle case, $13 million per coin, and best case, $49 million per coin. And that assumes, Michael Saylor says, that it does not become a payment technology and it does not replace fiat currencies, which are government-dictated currencies like the US dollar, which are currencies that are made up by fiat, by just dictate of the government, and are not backed by anything. So, according to him, it's going to be worth $13 million. The mid case is, or the sort of middle case, the most likely case is $13 million per Bitcoin, and that does not reflect any sort of taking over exclusive world currency status. That's just that it's such a much better store of value than gold that it will not only surpass gold, but that it will vastly exceed gold. And because it's just so much more useful as a monetary store of value, it is so much more scarce. It's so much more, durable, movable, and all that sort of stuff than gold. Divisible, etc., authenticatable, etc., etc. So all that to say, I don't know. The reason you don't hear me make predictions past $1 million per Bitcoin is not because I don't think it will go there. I think it will likely go far north of $1 million per coin. It's just I don't have strong personal conviction on how to model that. I just know, I think, as someone who, still owns some gold left over from many years ago and does not like it, and someone who owns a lot more Bitcoin and really does like it, I believe Bitcoin is vastly superior to gold for all of the purposes that gold and Bitcoin were intended to play. And because it is vastly superior, I think it will be vastly more valuable than gold. But again, how much more valuable? I don't know, which is why my predictions sort of stop at $1 million, because it just gets hard to model once you get north of $1 million per coin. But $1 million per coin is, 1,000% return, more than 10x your money. And then whether it goes up to 3 million a coin, which would be 30 times your money at today's price, or whether it goes to $13 million a coin, which is 100 times your money, who the heck knows? But anyway, it's anyone's guess. But the short take is just a heck of a lot more than the price today. All right. So the third question is, how do you value something that you can no longer value in another currency because it is the world reserve currency? And the answer is you do exactly what you do with the US dollar, which is you value things in the currency itself. And so for example, the M2 money supply, M is the word for the letter, or the letter for the word money. The M2 money supply is, I don't know, off the top of my head, I want to say $80 trillion, 80, or something like that. That's like all the bank deposits and all the money the government's printed, plus a bunch of different ways people borrow against money and rehypothecate money and multiply money and all that sort of stuff. Anyway, some really large number. So you can know how much the total value of all of the currency is. In the case of Bitcoin, it's 21 million. But you can also value everything using that measuring stick. So, for example, we know that all the assets in the world are worth about $900 trillion. And it's like, well, wait, how can we know that all the assets in the world are worth $900 trillion when there's only about, let's call it $80 trillion of M2 money supply? I don't know what the M2 is. I should have looked it up before this video, but whatever it is, I'm going to say 80 trillion, but it, moves around. And the answer is because you can evaluate, okay, an ounce of gold is worth $2,700, and then you multiply that by all the ounces and you get 18 trillion. So, okay, you got 18 trillion. Then you say the average piece of real estate is worth, X. Multiply that by all the pieces of real estate. So it's possible to measure the value of everything in the world. It's possible to measure that in terms of Bitcoin or US dollars, and you end up with a number that is much larger than the total supply of Bitcoin or the total supply of US dollars. Now, as it relates to measuring Bitcoin itself, you do lose the ability to measure that in another currency if nobody's using the other currency. Because what you end up with is like hyperinflation, which is how much is one of the old Zimbabwe dollars worth compared to one US dollar? Well, the answer is we don't know, because after it went to 100 trillion to 1, it hyperinflated the rest of the way, and now it's worth 0. So it's like, at some point, if people stop using a fiat currency like the US dollar, it gets hard to measure in that fiat currency because nobody's using it anymore, and you effectively end up with a number that's almost infinite. So if Bitcoin did become the future monetary system of the world, and if nobody was using any other currency, then yes, the price per Bitcoin would no longer be able to be measured in a currency that was no longer being used, because you'd end up with, effectively something unlimited, like the Zimbabwe currency, which they stopped measuring once it went to 100 trillion to 1. And then they basically just abolished the currency and started over. So the same thing would happen. It'd be like, well, every Bitcoin's worth $100 trillion, but that's just when we stopped counting, and nobody measures that way anymore. And nobody would, it's not like, 100 trillion Zimbabwe dollars even gets you $1 anymore because it basically inflated to infinity. So the same thing would happen with fiat currencies, where they would eventually effectively go to infinity. Bitcoin would go to infinity as compared to those currencies, but you would still be able to measure Bitcoin. So the question is, well, how much are all the Bitcoin worth? Well, 21 million Bitcoin, obviously, because that's the most there will ever be. Well, then you could say, okay, but let's do the same thing with like M2 money supply, which is how much is all the Bitcoin plus all the Bitcoin that's been loaned out, plus all the Bitcoin that's been, all the different ways people, multiply Bitcoin, which doesn't really happen now, but could happen in the future if people were comfortable with banks doing fractional reserve banking, which they shouldn't, and it's stupid, but some people inevitably will. So you'll end up with some number bigger than 21 million Bitcoin, which basically just indicates that, hey, not everybody can pay each other back right now. And if you're comfortable lending money in that way, that's exactly how the US dollar works. The total amount of debt in the system right now far exceeds the number of US dollars that are available to pay off the debts. So the currency can be way less than the total amount of debt in the world, because all that debt does not need to be paid off simultaneously. Only a small part needs to be paid out in any given year, and the rest gets, deferred to future years. So the same would be true with Bitcoin, that everything would be measured in Bitcoin. You would measure Bitcoin against itself, meaning the base money would be 21 million. But if people are loaning out the Bitcoin and other people are depositing that Bitcoin in their bank accounts, and the original owners are still counting it, you would end up with a number above 21 million, but it would still be measured in Bitcoin. And then you'd look at the world, all the assets in the world, and you'd say, okay, well, right now, all the Bitcoin's worth in US dollars 2 trillion, and all the assets in the world are worth 900 trillion. So that means you can get a sense of sort of how much every Bitcoin's worth, because it's a ratio of 2 trillion as compared to 900 trillion. So 1/450th of the world's value is currently in Bitcoin, but a lot more of it is in gold, a lot more of it is in fiat currency, and that will flip over time. But there will still be a ratio. You'll still be able to say, hey, all the Bitcoin in the world is equal in value to 1% or 5% or 10% or 20% or whatever that number is, as compared to all the other value in the world. And I think Michael Saylor, I think it's his base case of $13 million, assumes that Bitcoin represents 7% of the value of the assets in the world. I think there's about 900 trillion in assets, and of that, I think about half is financial assets, 450 trillion in financial assets, and I think he assumes that 7% of that 450 trillion ends up in Bitcoin, and therefore comes up with a price of like $13 million per coin, something like that. I could go look up all those numbers, but I just didn't do that before this video. But anyway, I hope that answers the question. Super long answer because it was a multi-part question, but a great question. So thanks, and keep them coming. Thanks, everyone.